Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you, John, for having me. As John said, I actually got in first time experience the Vanguard Method was here in the UK. Back then I was working for Lloyds Banking Group. Some of my prior colleagues are in the room. And I will talk about some experiences I had with them. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about my learning journey of different improvement methodologies that are used in financial services, but also beyond, and why I get to the point that I believe the only way forward is system thinking and the Vanguard Method if you're in a service industry. So let's talk about me for 2 minutes only. I've been around the place a little bit. I spent time in New Zealand, in Germany, in the UK. Obviously, I am from Germany, as you can hear, originally. But spent probably the last 15 years before I went back to Germany in English-speaking countries. And I've always been in retail banking, really, for all my career, most of it at Lloyds. And I have experience with offshoring, Philippines, India, and I've done pretty much all the methodologies, Six Sigma, Lean for service, operational excellence, you name them. I've done them at some point in my career. I put down here what motivates me and why I go to work. And I think that's also why I'm a big fan of the Vanguard Method, because it matches with what drives me. I like to work with people, and I like to learn and help them learn. And that's really integral to this method. And that's why it's fun to do it. And I am German, and therefore I like to be efficient. And therefore this is a great way to spend my time. So when I started out, when was it? Back in 2004, I came into the Lloyds TSB back then, now Lloyds Banking Group, and we already did Lean there, Lean for manufacturing. And I always worked in operations and did lots of different jobs there. I was on a graduate scheme, I did a bit of team leader, I did a bit of risk management, I did a bit of project management, and I also spent some time in the Lean Academy, we called it back then. So it's a bunch of people going out, training others in the Lean methodology. But back then, we were not that sophisticated about it. Banks still made quite a lot of money. Was prior to the financial crisis. So costs were sort of relevant, but not really the main driver. So we sort of, looked at it. We wanted to be efficient. We wanted to get better. But it was sort of something that ops did over there. And the people that really counted were in marketing and in the product teams and in the branches. Ops wasn't really the place to be. But I learned a lot of methodologies then. We talked a lot about plan, do, check, act. Lean has all the great things about customer value and defining it, talking about the value stream, flow, pull, perfection. You all know these principles, yeah? And there was a lot about measures and numbers and tech time and Kanban and Pokioki and all the Japanese terms. And we tried to sort of take them and put them into these service centers where we didn't really build cars. Yeah? We had thousands of phone calls coming in, every single phone call was different. So we sort of worked out, we can do something with this, but it doesn't work that well. And how do you deal with variation? And most certainly as well, how do you keep the work interesting for the people? So we moved on from there, and so did I. Was really early on. I got slightly more professional, I would hope. So my career moved on, and I actually sort of graduated from the grad scheme and got a real job, which was running an operation. Yeah, and had about 150 people, was a complaints handling team, complaints very popular in financial services. Back then, it wasn't PPI, it was the overdraft charges. Some of you might remember that time. That was the scandal before the PPI. And what was very apparent then in that time is that the regulator was moving in. They were saying, guys, you have to change. And then 2008 happened. And I remember the day when I got called in by my boss in the morning. Actually, in the night before, I watched it in the news and I didn't believe it. And I was given one pager and had to brief my team that Lloyds TSB was taking over HBOS. And I didn't believe it in the evening because it sounded like something that would never happen. But it did happen. So suddenly, costs were very, very interesting. Yeah? We didn't make that much money anymore. We had these two major banks coming together. We had everything twice. It wasn't that efficient, working very differently, so costs became really, really interesting. So we learned and we moved on to lean for service and operational excellence. The fundamental basics haven't changed if you compare it to lean for service, but you had a lot of rules about how to work. Every job was described in detail. Every team leader had clear accountabilities. Every ops manager had clear accountabilities in terms of what their planning frameworks were, who does what check when, yeah, how many one-to-ones do you do, forms to fill out. So what it certainly gave you, the methodology, is a feeling of control. Yeah? And we certainly were able to cut about 10% of costs year on year without any IT investment. Yeah? It's just optimizing of processes, playing around a bit, functionalizing things, specializing teams, doing training differently, talking about a lean spectrum. So we treated work that was deemed more complex differently to work that you could standardize because it was the same every time, or so we thought. Yeah, we did a lot of stuff around trying to understand failure demand. So we knew there was failure demand. And we, in many cases, actually knew how much failure demand was there, but we didn't know how to solve it. Yeah, so it was always in a call center, 30 to 40% of calls were failure demand, fairly standard, when it was a reasonably well-run call center, but we just could not get rid of it. We tried lots of different things, didn't work out that well. We moved on from there, so did I again. I had lots of jobs in between, but by the time I got to this, I was running the mortgage operations team in Lloyds Banking Group, the biggest mortgage provider in the UK. So therefore, a very, very big team. It's about 1,500 people. And we didn't even look after anything that was done in the branches. So this was just customers coming to us either via brokers or online or calling us. Said, I want a mortgage. And we gave them a mortgage and we serviced the mortgage. And that was a point where someone very smart in the organization, I don't know who it was, brought Vanguard in. And similar to Richard, one day my boss turned up, and I didn't really get on with him that well, but that was actually a really great decision he made. He said to me, Katharina, you're not running the team anymore. From tomorrow, you're going to run this intervention. A very similar reaction. I was interested in this methodology. I heard about it. I wanted to know more about it. I was like, but who's going to look after 1,500 people, if not me? Because clearly there was no one better there than me to do that job. But anyway, we worked it out. I came out of my job. And surprise, surprise, the normal operation did continue to run, even without me there. And I started to get into that intervention. And what was the thing that really sort of changed my perspective was realizing that if you have an operation that is growing particularly, and that was at that time quite unique in financial services. Most financial services companies did well if they didn't shrink. Our mortgage business was actually growing, and at the same time, no one was allowed to hire. So how do you solve that problem? And the only way you can solve that is if you create capacity. And the way you create capacity is to take out failure demand. And what I found really powerful with the Vanguard method, it taught me how to take out failure demand. No other method before could do that for me. They taught me how to recognize failure demand, but didn't help me necessarily to take it out. So what was so powerful about it was that it was so simple. And that's also one of the reasons why I actually decided to change companies, because the position I have in Barclaycard Germany, I said I run the end-to-end operation. How great is that? Yeah, so I can actually change it. And I can control how the customer feels about being a customer there and what service they get. And what I also learned is that this method actually works really, really well in the 21st century, where people come to work, not necessarily all for a paycheck, especially the younger generation. There's a lot of talk in businesses about what we're going to do with these people that grow up now and that don't know a world where there was no internet. Yeah? And their value system is different. They don't necessarily come to work and say, I want to be the next director of so-and-so. They say, I want a fulfilled life. I want to do something interesting. And what this method does is actually give you, as a leader, the opportunity to give your people that feeling that they're actually contributing something bigger, that there is a purpose to their work. And the purpose of changing something and providing great customer service is probably a lot more powerful than the purpose of saying I have a 100% QA score. So what the Vanguard method learned me is to really listen and learn from my colleagues. I've always been a leader that's been out on the floor. I did call listening, I talked to my people, but I didn't do it in a structured way. I always thought I had a pretty good grasp on what's happening, what's working, what's not working. But I never did it to that level of detail. You need to forget about what you know about good management. We all grew up in organizations where good management means you have a green dashboard. It doesn't necessarily mean to challenge what's on that dashboard. From what we heard so far, some people may get the impression that numbers aren't important in the Vanguard method. Quite the opposite is true. So while it feels a bit scary not to have a target, you will have a lot of measures. And the way the method works has a lot of safeguards built in. So you do a lot of piloting, you do a lot of proof of concepts, you're trying out stuff really small scale. So if it's wrong, so what? Yeah, so you essentially can only win. And that brings me to the end already. So while this method isn't maybe industry standard yet, I truly believe that more and more organizations will go that way. I don't think there is anything out there that's comparable and then can solve the problems that all organizations have nowadays. And that is, how do I engage my colleagues? How do I deliver value for money? And how do I deliver a great customer experience? Maybe not in that order, but that's what the method does. And therefore, you all should try it if you haven't done it yet.